My name is Matthew Lawrence. I am your canon for spiritual formation, even though I don't look like it. This is one of my favorite t-shirts with that's Minnesota, in case you didn't know. And today we're delighted to have with us Karen Miller. I don't remember who it was who suggested to me that we should invite Karen Miller to come
It
speak
might
with
have
us.
been Jerry Condon.
That could very well be. Jerry
She knows
Condon, one
what
of
I
our
do.
most talented textile workers here in the Cathedral and a dear friend as well. At any rate, it seemed like a great idea. I reached out to Bishop Diana, and Diana put me in touch with Karen. Karen Miller has been making art with traditional Japanese technique called Katazome, which is a form of stencil dyeing, for 25 years. Um,
That's right.
and so she was asked by Bishop Diana to create vestments that reflected both her Japanese heritage and the passion that the bishop has for the natural world, especially water, um, with delicate and understated and fluid design elements. Anybody who's seen the bishop's vestments should be completely impressed by how gorgeous they are. They're just, I've never seen such beautiful vestments, and I personally am deeply moved by the way they reflect the bishop's culture and design style. It's just fantastic. So, with that, Karen, thank you so much for being with us. I'm gonna just be in the background. I'm gonna darken my screen so you don't have to look at me. And Karen, thank you for being here. Take it away.
Okay, so I will tell you a little story to start with. Um, I've been doing this Japanese stencil dyeing work for 25 years. I had always been interested in the traditional Japanese stencils, and I heard about a class in Roseburg, Oregon, taught by a Japanese indigo dyer who was good friends with the mayor of Roseburg's Japanese sister city. And he was going to come to Oregon and teach people how to do indigo dyeing, and among other things, he was going to have them cut a stencil. And I thought, well, okay, this is my chance. So I drove our, at that time, new motorhome in second gear, I think, all the way to Roseburg, and took this class and cut my first stencil. And it was as close to a conversion experience as anything I've ever experienced. Um, I absolutely knew that that was what I was supposed to do. So I spent several years cutting traditional Japanese patterns, of which there are many, many available copyright free, and branched out from there into all kinds of other things, which you will see. So in October of the first pandemic, when people were still very locked down before vaccines, I had a phone call from Diana Akiyama saying that she and her sister had found my website and they had determined that I was the only person who could make vestments that fit the vision that she had of what she wanted, which was like, oh, okay, no pressure at all. Yipes. But I met with her and I met with her often, and it was clear that what she had in mind was really very compatible with the way I view the kind of imagery that I work with, and that furthermore, she was an accomplished seamstress herself and sort of understood what she was asking of me. Um, but she really didn't know anything about Katazome. Um, and I had to be able to veto some things as not possible, and I had to challenge myself in ways that I never thought possible, um, to do what it was that she had in mind. Oops, wrong way. It's going the right ways. Um, so, as you know, the set of vestments involves a chasuble and a stole and a miter and a cope. And we started with the chasuble because it was the most immediately possible to do. and so this was the rough sketch that I came up with initially for a chasuble that has um, a center panel of Japanese silk and a border, a red border. She wanted all of her vestments to be made with silk broadcloth, which is not a stiff, shiny fabric. It's a very soft, sort of matte finish. Um, and that was fine because I work with that a lot. And what we decided to do was to take a set of the traditional Japanese patterns, some of the ones that I cut early in my career, and she looked through I don't know how many there were of those, 50 or 60 of those stencils, and chose ones that had particular meaning for her seasonally or, in other ways. And those would become the pattern center panel. And so these are the stencils. You can see they're about 11 by 17, and the images had come from traditional kimono patterns and futon cover patterns and that sort of thing. The stencils are made of handmade Japanese paper with a layer of silk mesh. So where can you see my cursor? Oh, okay. Well, maybe. Um, where you see the white openings, that's where the silk mesh is. That's where the resist paste that I use goes through the stencil. And she wanted to include in that um, some stencils that represented both the diocese, which is that Portland rose, and her own um, family's crest, hers and her sister's family's crest, because those families were very involved in the formation of the church in Hood River, where she grew up. So I looked up those names and found family crests that would be appropriate, and designed the other little stencil to represent the Portland rose. And they went in between the panels. And this panel has resist paste on it. And you can see I have left a space here for the cross, the red cross that will go on. And this is a video of how I apply the dye. The fabric is stretched in wooden clamps, kind of like a hammock, with bamboo stretchers that goes across and to hold it taut in both directions. And the dye is applied with a big, soft brush. And she was wanting it to shade from green to blue at the shoulder, so I'm applying the green first. And you can see I really rub the dye into the silk. And in order to get a graded transition, what I need to do is to feather out the green so that it almost disappears before I add the blue on top of it, so that you get a transition that is it's a sort of an ombre effect. It doesn't have a sharp line. So you can see how I'm making it lighter and lighter and lighter and softer and softer and softer as I feather that top edge of green before I add the blue. This is a technique that I use a lot in my work, and it's something that the dyes that I use make particularly possible. These are powdered watercolor pigments in freshly prepared soy milk, which is a technique that you see in Okinawa. So there goes the blue on top. And as the blue goes down over the green, then you begin to get these transitional colors. And that is the finished chasuble, which you, of course, have all seen. Um, I dyed the red silk specifically, and there you can see where that transitional area is. One of the things that I used in separating the various patterns that I used were some narrow border patterns. And when it came time to make the deacon stole, I brought out a whole collection of these narrow borders and lined them up to make a stripe. So this is has resist paste and dye, but it has not been the dye has not been washed off. The resist paste I use is um, sticky rice flour, finely milled rice bran, and water, which is basically just a dough, and you steam it and spread it. It smells like brown rice and looks like warm peanut butter, and it comes off the fabric in 20 minutes in warm water. It's not like wax. It doesn't have any problems that way. And you can see what happens when the resist paste comes off. It's like Christmas morning. It's like, oh, look at that pattern. Still, even after all these years, it's like, oh, wow, there's the pattern. Um, so that was the fabric for the deacon stoles. And I have made now a second one for bigger deacons. And then I began to work on the stole. The stole was very, very personal to her. Um, and because over the years I've cut a large number of small stencils that I used to combine to produce other work, I was able to get out a whole range of animals and plants and birds and fish and seaweed and all kinds of things um, that represented the natural world. And so I basically made a cartoon of the stole pattern showing me where the various stencils were going to fit. Um, and then I used that to produce the fabric um, for the stole. And it was a lot of fun to work on. It really was. There's the Portland rose, and there's fish appearing, and there's trilliums, and there's um, things that are characteristic of Oregon and of the sea. And oh man, it was fun. I really enjoyed working on it. And it was this is the stole. Um, I know she probably would be all right with me admitting that um, it brought tears to her eyes when she came. She was just so thrilled with how it turned out. You know how daffodils grow along the highway in Oregon, and she's going to be driving back and forth all along I-5. So I put some daffodils on there for her, and some seagulls, and all kinds of things, shrimps. And it was very fun. And there's the stole as she wears it. And then while all this was going on, I was dealing with the much larger problem of the cope. The Fortunately, there's a woman in Connecticut that makes patterns for these things, or that at least has very complete directions about how to make vestments, because it was new to me, all this. But what she wanted on this huge half circle um, floor length cope was a swash of water, starting with the pool of water at the hem and ending with just a froth at the shoulder. Well, as you saw earlier, the stencils are rectangular. They're made to um, produce kimono fabric, which is 14 inches wide and 12 meters long, as a repeat. Um, but you can't do that. This had to be a trapezoid, and it had to be the right curvature to go over this shape and across quite a number of seams. And it was very, very challenging project to think of how I was going to get that complicated pattern across all of those seams. It, so that was the original stencil that she liked for the water pattern, but of course it's not a trapezoid. And we took it into Photoshop and we squeaked around and we got out protractors and compasses and graph paper, and my husband and I together puzzled and puzzled and puzzled over it and finally came up with a modification of that stencil that would make that curve. And I was quite proud of myself for dealing with that technically. And then I had to design from the end of that trapezoid separate stencils to form the froth and the pool. And they then fit against sort of a masked, an end to that thing. So that was what I had, was 3 stencils and a lot of basting and a lot of measuring and a lot of agonizing, and until I was reasonably certain that I knew what I was going to do. So we made a muslin um, for the cope and made sure that that it was going to fit. And then I applied the resist paste to my pieces of fabric. The cope is so large that you couldn't do it as a whole garment. You had to do it as individual pieces, of which there were 6. And so I was having to paste my resist paste across the seam line from one panel to the next. And it was scary. My mother used to say when she taught Cub Scouts that when the meeting was over, she would go upstairs and take aspirin. That was kind of how I felt at the end of the 6 hours it took me to paste these things one at a time. It was white knuckle sort of, because if you goofed up even once, you were doomed. So it required total concentration. You can see the resist paste going on. It's creamy and sort of velvety, spreads very easily. It's nice stuff to work with, actually. And then you can see when I'm done, after I smooth it out evenly, I'll peel off the stencil, and you can see where it is. It's going across the where the seam line is going to be. And you have to be very, very careful. And then, even if you're careful, it isn't always exactly right, and you have to go in and very carefully repair the paste so that it goes correctly across that seam line in every place. So that was another little project. Sorry, we didn't think to turn the music off. Classical music is what keeps my brain intact when I'm doing something tense. So, as each panel was completed, I hung it to dry. So you can see there's one of those big wedges is there. There's other ones which have a paper pattern pinned to them in preparation for where the next one goes. And then I got to do the dyeing, which was a great deal more fun. She wanted a blend of greens and blues. So that's what I did. I put the blue on first and then I did the green. And oops, sorry, that's a video. And you can see the brushes that I use they vary in size. You saw the big wash brush before, but these are blending brushes that allow me to shade over things. And the brushes are badger hair, and they range from 8 inches long and fat down to, I swear, 6 bristles. I used to call those little brushes the ones they used to paint the fish's eyeballs with. It's just tiny. Um, and they're done, they're square on the bottom. They're not, for the most part, they're not round. So that you work vertically and you work the pigment down into the fabric. So what I'm doing now is being very careful along my edges. And I'm going down to an even smaller brush to really know where I'm doing. And these things they're in midair when you work. They bounce a little bit. You have to hold on with one hand to kind of stabilize it. It's not like it's lying flat on the table. So I'm going in and getting my edges. And then, even then, after you sew it together, you discover there's places where it doesn't quite match. So I had to go in. These are Inktense pencils, which are um, liquid dye in a pencil form that when you wet it, you can use it to make corrections. And so that was how I fixed the places where the pattern, when I sewed it, didn't quite match. And in the end, it was okay. And at that point, I borrowed a dressmaker friend um, who does wedding sewing to help me with the fitting and particularly with the hemming. I have replaced knees, and there's no earthly way I was kneeling on the floor to mark that hem, which had to be weighted and allowed to relax and whatnot before the final cut was made. So my friend helped me. And then when it was all done, I had this gigantic piece of fabric, and she was wanting me to put some metal threads on it and some beads. Well, the metal threads, the Japanese metal threads, come on a spool, and my husband, bless his heart, rigged up a little gizmo for wearing around my neck out of a pickle jar that would allow me to stitch that gold thread onto the fabric and have it neatly unreel and not turn into some kind of god awful tangle. And so that was what I did. And that's what the finished detail like. And then I spent longer than I was comfortable with hand sewing all those beads on. This was right before Christmas, and of course, everybody was still locked down. It's the only time in my life I've ever been glad that my kids were not coming for Christmas because I was quite literally glued to the chair, sewing on beads and hem facings and all this kind of stuff. There's another detail. So those beads all went on individually. And then I began to work on the miter. Well, I had never in my life made a miter, and I was very fortunate that she had been given a miter from a previous bishop that I was allowed to dismantle a little bit to figure out how in the world the thing was constructed. But what we decided to use was this image that I took at a temple in Kyoto of a lattice work gate that I thought was particularly beautiful. And I had made a stencil from it for my own purposes. And I adapted that stencil pattern to produce the red, lacy red pattern on the front of the miter. And you can see here I'm cutting that stencil. This is the beautiful little Japanese stencil knife that I use. It's a carbon steel blade that I can hone in a split bamboo handle. And then, as it turns out, the front and the back of a miter are lashed to the stiffening. I mean, this literally sewn. There's no glue of any kind. You just sew it down with long threads to hold the piece of silk against the stiffener. And um, she and I did a fair amount of fitting. And by the time you get this shape and you cover it with fabric and you line it, you have to be very, very meticulous about exactly what the circumference is on it so that it fits properly on the head of the bishop, because that has to, as you know, it comes on and off during the service, and it has to be something that's easy and fits right and whatnot. So we did a lot of fiddling around with the fit. And once I had my fronts and backs done, um, then I lined it, um, and it's all put together by hand. And then there's a little skull cap that goes inside. Um, and there's lappets, which were a separate stencil. But I was pleased with how it turned out, and I think she was too. And that was the finished set of vestments, and I can tell you I was thrilled and she was thrilled. We were really excited when it was done. Um, that it turned out exactly as she wanted, and you can see what my project was with all those blues and greens, trying to get that wave to go around the back of that vestment. But I watched when she was installed, and as she left the front of the church and walked across in front of the railing, that cope flowed like water behind her. I was just beyond thrilled at how beautifully it moved with her. And she had all along said that what she wanted was something that was very fluid and not stiff, and it certainly was. We were both of us just delighted with how it turned out. Um, and I was honored to have been asked. I really was. It was one of the most engaging and challenging projects that I've ever undertaken. Um, but it was absolutely in tune with the way I view the natural world. Now, if you would like, I can show you some examples of my other work that gives you a clue about why she chose me to do this in the first place. This is a coat. This is linen and cotton, I think, that I made in imitation of a veil kimono. I'd been invited to the um, Folk Art Museum in Santa Fe um, to teach a class and to give a lecture. And the garment that they had on display to represent the stencils that were in their collection was a veil kimono, which had the half a chrysanthemum and a lot of small sort of botanical patterns. And so, in homage to that, I made this coat. Um, and I still wear it. But it was a whole cloth printed fabric, which, like the coat project, was um, you couldn't goof up. But I do other work. This pair of cranes that you see on here is the first stencil I ever cut. So that was 25 years ago, and I'm still using that stencil. And I've done some more recent things using all kinds of patterns that I've developed. I do quite a lot of work on Rami, which is a linen-like fabric, scrolls, um, door curtains, which are two pieces sewed together at the top that are traditional in Japan. Um, that's a nor, and that's a door curtain. Um, I have a gallery over in Cannon Beach that handles a lot of that for me. And I'm a quilter, and I started many years ago with all of those traditional Japanese patterns that I just couldn't resist. It got to be like eating salted peanuts. I finally ended up with 100 of these little small stencils and made a big quilt out of it. And then I moved on to much more organic patterns, not um, Japanese patterns anymore, but skeleton leaves and flowers and aerial photographs and crystal structure and all kinds of things that fascinated me as a scientist. I was a marine biologist at OSU. And this is called animal, vegetable, mineral. And then more recently, I've been experimenting as a biologist. I worked on octopus for 20 years. So this is the octopus's garden. This is a quilt. And because you know how the things that live in tide pools look like flowers but aren't, I just decided I would compose a quilt as though the octopus lived among that garden. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And this one is another quilt. It's called Are We There Yet? Again, a quilted background, and then the salmon are appliqued on the surface. And the most recent one is a quilt called Dancing with the Stars. If you look on our coast at the starfish that live where we are, they come in all those colors. If you go to northern British Columbia, they're almost all violet. If you go to Southern California, they're almost all gold. So we on our coast get this tremendous mixture of colors. So this is another quilt. I cut the stencils individually for those starfish. It took 6 weeks, and padded them and appliqued them onto the quilt. So that's the end of my story, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Karen. I'm so inspired by this. I'm so glad you documented this so well, with such great video, and really being able to see you apply the dye and the base is fantastic. Thank you so much. And did you say this is the first experience with liturgical design?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Was that terrifying? I would think it would be.
Well, I've been a seamstress all my life. So if I have a pattern, I can make a garment. There were elements of this that were challenging. I mean, any competent bridal seamstress could make that cope and deal with the fact that the hems had to be weighted and trimmed and all that kind of stuff. Putting the stencil design on it was the challenging part. That was scary.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot. And making the miter was an interesting adventure. And I'm not certain. I had somebody contact me after the service wanting me to make a miter. And what I told him was I didn't think I could make a miter long distance. That she and I had measured her head, and we thought we knew what size that miter needed to be. And yet when it came down to the fine tuning and you put a band of the stiffener in and you nibble a little off and you nibble a little off until it gets exactly right. If you don't have the bishop there to actually fit the miter properly, it's not going to be comfortable to wear. So I would be very reluctant to make miters unless I was able to be very involved in the fitting of the miter for somebody.
Yeah.
Stoles are no problem. Chasubles are not any great problem. Copes are a lot of work. That was, I don't know, I at one point measured how long the hem was on the cope and on the lining and how much hand sewing I had to do to put that facing on, and it was not fun.
Well, you got a star in heaven for that one now. Any questions from the group? Anybody online or in the room that wants to ask some questions, please jump in. There's got to be some questions.
Well, I just saw Octopus, my teacher, Have you seen that movie? Because I see that, the octopus's garden just made me think of that movie instantly. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate your love of sea life. Thank you.
Well, and I think that was one of the things that um, Bishop Diana saw immediately when she looked at my work was this is a woman who has as much delight in the life of the sea as I do. And that was one of the reasons she chose me.
Well, also, I would think it's that you had already demonstrated a deep understanding of and respect for Japanese design,
Oh, yeah,
mastery of the craft,
right.
which, has got to be in these parts, putting those elements together, just the seamstress ability, the design ability, the just all of it together, really you did. I think she was right. You were the only person who could have made those vestments.
It's possible. Um, my Japanese friends, the people who've helped me with my exhibits when I was showing my work in Japan, were fairly thoroughly convinced I must have been Japanese in another life, because I truly understand and appreciate their reverence for their own natural history, and have translated that into my own work.
It's a great example of the challenge we have with cultural appropriation, that term.
Yeah,
Whenever people of a dominant culture are adapting design or music or anything from a different culture, if you do it sloppily and unthinkingly, it is cultural appropriation. You're using people's and other cultures' images without reflection of what they really mean, and any respect for the culture you're appropriating. And in your case, you're demonstrating how it's done right with mastery and skill and intelligence and collaboration. Yeah. So thank you for that.
well, you're very welcome. It's been it's been a continuing journey, and I will say as I age, I have not lost my passion for this thing. We've just finished putting double railings in all the stairs in the house so that I can continue to get to the dye studio in the basement and the sewing studio on the second floor safely, because I haven't lost at all the passion for doing this work. And I don't, I can't imagine moving anywhere where I would have the facilities that I have in this 3-story house. So we're just finding ways to make it possible to continue getting up and down the stairs and doing the work.
Well done, Karen Miller. Any final questions? Final questions for Karen?
Go ahead. This is Rose Hart. Karen, I have just finished making my journey from Corvallis to the sea, and now I'm in Portland, and I get to view your work on a more regular basis. But I don't remember we used to walk together in Corvallis.
I'm going to have an exhibit of quilts and yarn at the Unitarian Church, the big downtown Unitarian Church, from the 4th of November through the middle of December. And I have a website if people are interested. It had a broken place, but my husband fixed it. And I will put the website in the chat.
Wonderful. And while you're doing that, let me just say thank you again to Karen Miller for beautiful work and her service to the bishop and to the cause of beauty in our world. And thank you, everybody, for being part of it.